Hello and welcome back. I'm Dr. Mark D. Baldwin, and today's lecture is on Nathaniel Hawthorne. One of America's most culturally representative writers, most of Hawthorne's works are pervaded by a sense of a dark past, some event which clouds the present. Haunted by his own family history, his grandfather was a judge in the Salem witch trials. Hawthorne wrote symbolic tales about the guilt of sin as a psychological burden. In this mindset, he was influenced by his Puritan heritage, which we'll talk about more in a moment. His contemporary, Herman Melville, said that Hawthorne's works have the power of blackness. Throughout his writing, Hawthorne seems socially and morally isolated. Perhaps his childhood events account for that sense. Due to his father's early death, Hawthorne was raised primarily by women. His ship captain father died at sea when Nathaniel was 4. His mother took to her room and rarely emerged, dressing permanently in black, and Nathaniel was pampered by his 2 sisters. Quite apparently, he developed a penetrating understanding and appreciation of women. In his youth, he was somewhat lame due to a foot injury and thus didn't play much with other children, preferring solitude or the company of his sisters. He became, as I alluded to at the outset, obsessed with the past. His residence in Salem, his relatives' role in the witch trials, and the sense that his family was of declining financial and social position. His relatives didn't admire or encourage his literary ambitions. After attaining his college education, Hawthorne retired to his attic and wrote for 12 solid years, from 1825 to 1837. Much of this work he burned. Early in his career, he had difficulty getting published and read, and this rejection only reinforced his shy and retiring nature, making him want to be perceived by his genial readers as a genial storyteller. Throughout his life, Hawthorne was ambivalent about his Puritan heritage, at once attracted to and repulsed by its rigid doctrine. Puritanism itself is ironic to the core, teaching that the self must be denied, yet everyone must first be concerned with their own soul's salvation. Thus there's a dualism between the self and soul. We must hate ourselves, but love our souls. This theme is played out many times in Hawthorne's works. The biblical base of Puritanism is founded on the belief in providence, that God intervenes in the lives of man, and predestination, that God has a master plan. Man is naturally depraved, innately evil, a sinner. Adam and Eve, having committed the original sin, doomed mankind to a life of sin and distance from God. Throughout his stories, Hawthorne examines how this Puritan ideology works in the world, particularly the effects of sin on people's lives. Although a significant number of people today reject these beliefs, substituting the word mistake or the expression bad decision for the word sin may be helpful in deriving meaning and pleasure from reading Hawthorne's stories. Hawthorne cobbled secular humanism with the Christian belief in sin, guilt, and redemption, taking religion and using it in a human-centered basis. He tempered his belief in the primacy of human evil with the optimistic spin that evil serves a higher purpose and has a social value. For in order to know good, one must know evil. Ironically, then, evil is a source for good and brotherhood, and that when one falls into sin, it's an opportunity to stand up even stronger and firmer in virtue. In fact, the Latin term felix culpa means the fortunate fall, only by sinning and falling can one stand on his own and ultimately achieve redemption. Hawthorne believed in the doctrine of limitations. There's a line between man and God. Man should not play God, attempt to be God, or delude himself into thinking he's in control of his life. This doctrine is seen throughout life and literature. In the sin of pride, which precedes a fall, after all. In the Garden of Eden's forbidden fruit, and in Goethe's and Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, who sold his soul to the devil for 24 years of power, fame, and fortune. When we go out too far, become too egotistical, believe that we are infallible or don't need God in our lives, we're being Faustian. And our fall, which can be fortunate if we repent, or doom if we fail to repent, is inevitable. Hawthorne's writing and belief system cannot be bounded by Puritanism or simplified by putting him in a religious or doctrinal box of some sort. In wrestling with the hard theological questions, he was a penetrating social critic and radical artist, ahead of his time in exposing the establishment and its power structure, stereotypes, and insensitivities. Artists were expected to maintain and support the status quo, so dark and iconoclastic views of life were frowned upon for their threat to the social order. Hawthorne's dark tales were disturbing, for they asked more questions than they answered, troubling readers' minds with subversive thoughts. In examining all the preceding philosophical ideas and beliefs, Hawthorne usually wrote in allegories. It could be said that his theoretical ambivalence was perfectly symbolized by the allegorical method, almost begging the very questions and evading the very issues he brings up through allegory's inherent representational narrative, always and forever once removed from absolute reality, whatever that may be. In allegory, there's a correspondence between the material and spiritual. Allegory deals in moral truths and lessons through characters who are symbols of an attitude or idea. Hawthorne often wrote allegories of the heart, an archetypal journey in which the heart is like a cave. As you enter, you see flowers and sunshine, with everyone putting on their best faces. But inside the heart, you discover evil, depravity, and darkness. Thus, if you only go halfway, you have a bad impression. But in the rear, all the way through the heart, the sunshine and flowers are in full bloom, perfected. The moral of the allegory of the heart is that to know good, you must know evil. Applicable to the allegory of the heart, Hawthorne identifies 6 primary character types. Number 1, the innocent, who has no knowledge of evil. Like a child, they don't go into the cave, suggesting that ignorance is bliss. Then there's the reformers. They go only halfway, wanting to purify evil. The scientists also only go halfway. They're lab people of the mind who want to manipulate other people. The doctrine of limitations applies to them. They shouldn't be playing God. Then there's the concealers. They also only go halfway, hiding their sin and depravity. The exalters also only go halfway. They're proud of their sin, somewhat like Melville's Ahab. And then there's the redeemers, who go all the way. They alone can do some good for other people. As the poet William Blake noted, the way to heaven lies through hell. Hawthorne wrote primarily romances, which he defined beautifully in The Custom House, the introduction to the Scarlet Letter. Quoting, "A neutral territory somewhere between the real world and fairyland, where the actual and the imaginary may meet. It's a place midway between private thought and the objective world." For Hawthorne, romance is a rebellion, a challenge to society. Romance depicted reality in what modernists call perspectivism, which posits that we can never know absolute truth since everyone's perspective of an event or object is determined by that particular point of view. Hawthorne's works are profound examinations of universal moral and psychological conflicts. His characters are tormented by hidden depravities and rebellious impulses that affect their fates. Hawthorne never offers a simplified representation of life, instead depicting it as complex and ambiguous. Hawthorne, like so many of his contemporaries, examined the plight of people trying to find their way and carve an existence in the new world. So many of his characters face demons and troubles in the deep, dark forest. Edgar Allan Poe's Pym travels to the South Pole. Melville's Ahab pursues a white whale around the globe. Whitman wanders along the westward trail. Huck Finn flees society down the Mississippi River. All of these characters and more are Americans, testing themselves by encountering elemental realities. There's a tension between society and solitude throughout Hawthorne's work. It could be argued that the downside of democracy is that it is based on an individualism which can lead to selfishness. Yet that same individualism is dependent upon organized society for sustenance. An individual's existence has little meaning apart from his relationship to other human beings. Symbolically, this tension is represented in Hawthorne's shifting settings of village and forest, city and country. This radical dualism is evident in other sets of oppositions in Hawthorne's work. The Manichaean religious doctrine that there's a basic conflict between spirit and matter, a battle of the self and soul, resonates throughout his stories. Hawthorne is forever attempting to achieve a reconciliation of opposites. Similar to Henry James's Circuit of Life and William Butler Yeats's There, one of Hawthorne's primary literary projects is to bring the subjective and objective poles together. A big question for Hawthorne is this: what is worse, the desire or the suppression of that desire? In many respects, Hawthorne was a transcendentalist. Please see my lecture on that subject for more information. In many stories, Hawthorne's characters experience a transcendental transformation, often by finally realizing their own limitations and accepting, if not fully embracing or understanding, their mortality and flawed human nature. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time for a discussion of Hawthorne's masterpiece, The Scarlet Letter.